Um, Welcome to Esoterica, the podcast. I'm your host, Chris Schultz, and joining me today is the president of the Crypto Corporation and manager of the art collective known as The Residents, Homer Flynn. How you doing today, Homer?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good, Chris. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, I think when we talked to you last, it was May, and everyone had just gone into lockdown. Since then, almost your entire state is burned to the ground. There's been protests in every major city across the country. Have you survived in one piece the last 8 months?
Yeah, I have survived actually amazingly well. Um, there was supposed to be a residence tour um, in May, which was rescheduled to May 2021, and now I don't think that doesn't seem likely to happen. Uh, there was also one scheduled for Europe for January, February 2021, and that's been pushed back. But what actually happened was that opened up a lot of schedule, a lot of time um, for everybody to start working on a residence film project that has been in the works forever. And that has moved along at a very nice pace. And at this point, it's in post production. Everybody's feeling pretty good about where we're at this point. So uh, we've made good use of the time.
Awesome. Well, the reason I asked you on today was I wanted to pick your brain, take you back 40 years to 1980 at the release of Goosebump, which was an EP.
Right, right. It was actually one side of an EP, which was a 12-inch EP.
Mhm.
And what happened was that the residents, they had just released Eskimo, and the residents have never been one to take themselves too seriously, and Eskimo for them was one of their more important projects at the time. But then they kind of went, well, yeah, that's cool, but um, let's do a disco version of it. So ultimately, they did Discamo, which was you taking some of the main themes from Eskimo and setting them to a disco beat. Um, but then the problem comes up. Well, what are we going to put on the other side? And somebody came up with the idea. I think maybe it was Hardy Fox, my ex-partner, who suggested, "Hey, well, why don't you guys make a children's album with a bunch of children's instruments?" And boy, they just flipped out. Oh, that's great. That's great. So, everybody got in the car and went down to Toys R Us and, loaded up with children's instruments and came back. And, to me, one of the real pluses of it is the fact that Snickfinger was around and he was available to work on it. So he adds a lot of really nice detailing that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Yeah, his guitar work really stands out on that. One of the things I noticed in the liner note was that one of the original discussions was a whole album. Is there, to your knowledge, any unreleased tracks hanging around? Anything that didn't make the final cut, sitting in a vault?
Um, well, I'll put it this way: not to my knowledge, but on the other hand, it wouldn't surprise me if maybe there was something stuck back in there somewhere. What's been happening recently is that Hardy unfortunately died a couple of years ago, and he retired 2 years before that. So I wound up inheriting um, a huge. He was the keeper of the archives, both product archives and tape archives, audio archives, and I have been working with a guy named Scott Colborn in Seattle, as well as Richard Anderson, the product manager at Cherry Red, to go through all this material and find this huge treasure trove of material that a lot of which either I didn't know about or I had forgotten about. And so something like that could pop up, out of this searching through the archives. I haven't heard about it yet, but it could happen.
Yeah, I was curious about that because I know at least with the Preserve series, they've been focusing on albums, and their Resonance has an incredible body of work, not just the studio albums, but a lot of EPs and singles, and it would be kind of cool to see some of the smaller stuff make it a remastered.
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, whether that's there or not, I really don't know, but it could be.
Now the album definitely has it's children's music, and then it's presume it's run through adult effects in the studio to give it that sort of atmospheric.
Right. I mean, I think they figured out. I mean, I think the concept at first was to do it, all with children's instruments, but I think they figured out pretty quickly. Well, there's only so far we can go with a little toy piano and kazoos and whatever. And so ultimately they went into all the effects that are harmonizers and reverbs and everything they had at that time. And once again, that kind of souped it up a lot.
Yeah, this album for me was special. It inadvertently got me into the Residents because someone had said, you should check out this band. They do this really creepy record of children's music, and the person didn't remember the name. So I think I got the Big Bubble, Wormwood, and Residue due before I got to Goosebump, and at that, I was completely sold.
Yeah, cool.
And one of the interesting things is, that Goosebump is kind of eerie. The thing that I've always really appreciated about the band is when they're unironic with the version of a song, it really brings out the creepiness underneath.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I think that was something that they really enjoyed doing, mainly because it was so kind of low risk. For one thing, it was the flip side of Discamo, and it wasn't like it was an album. They just didn't see it as something that was terribly important, and something that they could really have fun with.
Yeah, and I think we might have touched upon this when we talked before. Great artists have an evolution through the period of their careers, and like I think I've compared the Residents to Nick Cave before, where he started off sort of post-punk goth, and then he's become an elder statesman of the rock scene now. And the Residents seem to have gone from a little more fun. I don't want to say frivolous because they've explored a lot of concepts from the beginning, but they're certainly much more serious now. Any thought about returning to sort of that light and fluffy, just having fun with something?
Well, I think in some ways, they may have touched back into that to some extent from their point of view, with their most recent album, Metal, Meat and Bone, where they're doing these reinterpretations of these blues songs. And once again, it's kind of like, we can kind of do whatever we want to with this. And so I think for them, they felt like they kind of touched back into some of that at that point.
Yeah, they definitely have a way of doing covers. Like I always think back to It's a Man's World. I'm sure when that was originally written, it was intended to be flattering for women, and that is not what comes across when the Residents get a hold of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it doesn't exactly come across as flattering for anybody.
No,
it's kind of the resident style.
Yeah, and that's honestly, I think that's kind of what's been strange about living through 2020 is, I think the Residents throughout their career have always held up a mirror to not necessarily the underbelly, but the part of society that polite society doesn't like to acknowledge, and this year, that seems to have been all just out in the forefront.
Yeah, that's just all we're getting. But hopefully we'll see better next year.
I think we're in for a change. So 2020 is almost to bed. You mentioned you have movie is in post-production now. So
Right.
hopefully that's something we'll see in the next few months, maybe, or
Yeah, I mean the good thing, or one of the good things, not that there are a lot, but one of the good things about the pandemic is that it kind of takes the pressure off everything in a certain way, and really for the residents, I mean, they're studio people, so for them to actually have time to go in and try to polish this up as much as possible with post production. That's actually a good fit for right now. And these things they're so much promoted and marketed around film festivals. Which while they aren't non-existent, they're all virtual at this point. So I think they're just going to take their time. I think they've set like a loose deadline of early mid-spring to get this done. I know they're working on the soundtrack now, but they certainly aren't feeling any pressure. And if indeed their American tour, which is scheduled for May of next year, if that was to happen, well, that would change things.
yeah.
But with the schedules still being open, like I say, they can afford to take their time. I know they are starting to think about another album, and pretty soon that will start pressuring things more. But for now, they're happy just to kind of move along at their own pace and let it kind of open up and develop the way it wants to.
Yeah. Awesome. And that was going to be my next question, if there was any thought of a new album at all coming up.
Yeah, I mean, what's happened is that the soundtrack, working on the soundtrack for this, has all of a sudden opened up a door for what they might want to do with the next album, and they. Excuse me. They had some ideas for the soundtrack, and the nature of creativity often is that you have ideas about something.
Bless you.
Sorry, I don't know where all that's coming from. You have ideas about something, and then you start trying to implement those ideas, and then it's kind of like, yeah, well, that's not working. The implementation is not nearly as interesting as the ideas seem like going into it. And so they wound up taking a different approach towards the soundtrack work, but they kept thinking about the soundtrack idea, and that has now led them in a direction for the next album. And once again, they haven't done anything yet, but they feel like this could be, another door, another way to go when they want to do another album.
Awesome. It's fantastic to see new stuff is still continuing to come out.
Yeah, I mean, so much of creativity is learning how to follow the twists and turns that the process brings to you, and the residents are pretty good about that.
Keeping it fresh and young. Well, Homer, I want to thank you for taking time out on your Thursday. Well, it's afternoon for you. It's evening.
Yeah.
Here. Thank you again, and hopefully, I hope the tour gets to happen. I'd love to get to see the band. I think the Boston date is late April or May, but if not,
Yeah.
well, catch them at some point down the road.
Well, then we'll go for May 2022.
It's got to get better at some point, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, take care, and you have a great holiday, Chris.
Thanks. You too.